Hi, my name is Boris Scholl. I'm a lead program manager on the Cloud Platform Tools team within Visual Studio. So my team is looking after supporting developers to build large-scale distributed systems and services, and the lifecycle of the services and applications. So the lifecycle part is actually what brought me here today, because I want to talk to you about using Azure for your dev test purposes. As for the agenda, first we're going to talk about why you want to use Azure for your dev test purposes or for your dev test scenarios. Then we're going to jump right into a demo where I'm going to show you how easily you can create dev test environments in Azure using Visual Studio, the portal, or PowerShell. And then we're going to talk about images, Azure images that we created specifically for our MSDN subscriber audience. Because those images, we added software and tools to it that developers love and makes developers more productive. By adding those tools to those images, we hope that you, the developer audience, is productive right from the get-go as soon as the machine is provisioned. And at the very end, I'm going to show you some resources that go deeper into that topic of using Azure for dev test scenarios. So let's recap quickly why you want to use Azure for your dev test scenarios. So the first and most important reason why you want to do this is really you can rapidly spin up environments, either from Azure provided images or from your own customized images. So what does that really mean? So think about you want to build a dev test environment. In a traditional way, what you would need to do in an enterprise, you would need to size the machines of your test environment. You would need to go and order those machines, and it will take a while until those machines come in. You might be lucky, and some of your IT folks might find some machines that you can use for testing your application, but those might not be or might not have the specification that you really need. So with Azure, you can just log into the portal or use PowerShell or Visual Studio. You select an image, and as I mentioned before, there are multiple images provided by Azure and partners, and say, okay, I want to have a test environment of, let's say, Windows servers. And then you can decide how many Windows servers or how many machines you need. And then you can add additional software to those virtual machines. You can save them. And with that, you even create your own images. Another reason why you want to use or consider Azure for your dev test scenarios is really if you're doing some capacity planning and sizing exercises. So think about you want to build a web farm for on-premises. So meaning you don't even want to use Azure for your production workload. But in order to really estimate how much hardware do you need, how many servers do you need, what's the specification of those servers, you need to do some load testing. You need to get some practical experience in there in order to make the right decision. So Azure is perfect for those type of scenarios, because you do your initial capacity planning exercise by doing some calculations, how many requests per second you want to support and things like that. And then you say you want to start with 5 servers because your calculations gave you, or you ended up with 5 servers. So you create those 5 machines in Azure, and then you put your application on it, and then you run some performance and load tests. Then you realize how your application is behaving, whether 5 servers is enough, whether the CPU is enough, or whether the RAM is enough in those machines. And based on your test results, you can change it on the fly. You can add a new machine, or you can basically replace those machines with more powerful machines. And by that, you actually get a good sense of how your production farm should be sized on premises. Another reason for using Azure for dev testers, think about you've done all those tests. You're done with your development. You don't need the environment anymore. In Azure, you can just simply shut down those virtual machines and you're not being built again. So let's say you want to do an addition to your software, and then once you want to do another test, you just basically start up those machines again, and you can use the environment for additional tests. The last reason why using Azure for dev test purposes is a great option is you can access your dev test environment from pretty much everywhere. So we all know if you're in an enterprise or in a large company, your network and your resources are usually behind a firewall. They're really fenced. It's really secured environment. It's really hard to get to those servers from the outside. With having your dev test environment in Azure, you can actually access the environment over the internet. Furthermore, if you want to make your dev test environment access some resources or some servers in your corporate network, you can also do that by using virtual private networks in Azure and connect those virtual private networks with your company network. So those are all real good reasons for using Azure for your dev test scenarios. So with that, let's switch over to a demo. The first demo I'm going to show is how we integrated the dev test flow into your developer experience in Visual Studio. So in Visual Studio, you have actually two ways of creating a virtual machine. The first one is part of the File New Project, and this is the one I'm going to show you now. I'm going to hit File New Project, and here I want to create a new web application. Once I'm going to select a new web application, I'm being presented with the familiar new ASP.NET project dialog. But on the lower right corner, as you see, I have a host in the cloud option. So in that particular case, I want to use a virtual machine as the host of my application. So I'm going to select virtual machine. What that actually does is it tells Visual Studio, hey, for that particular application, I want to use a virtual machine for testing it. So I'm going to hit OK. And the next dialog is what we call the Create Virtual Machine dialog. And in here, I can do similar things as you can do in a portal. I can select the subscription that I want to use to host my virtual machine. And then I can go in here and select a DNS name, which is basically the name of the virtual machine, plus cloudapp.net. Let's say Visual Demo 2. And then I can select the image that I want to use. So the first selection in the drop-down box shows private images. So remember at the very beginning I was talking about you can create your own images in Azure. This is actually what that means. So in that case, I could use an image that I've already uploaded or pre-prepared to host my application. But for purpose of this demo, I create a new virtual machines, choosing one of our base images, the Windows Server 2012 R2 data center image. And what I want to do now is, because remember we want to host a web application on that virtual machine, I need to enable IIS and I need to enable web deploy to be able to deploy the application onto that machine. So in order to do that, I can just check the checkbox here, which says enable IIS and web deploy. What we do in the background is we're going to use extensions that will enable IIS on that virtual machine and also put web deploy in that virtual machine. And then everything is wired up in Visual Studio. So the next step, I can select the size. We leave it for, let's use the basic A2 2 cores. I could also use one of the larger sizes or one of the D machines if I wanted to do some SharePoint development for faster I/O. So now I'm going to enter the username and the password, which is the username and password I would use to remote desktop into the virtual machine. And then I just hit OK. So what's happening now is we're going ahead and we're creating the project. But not only that, in the background, we also create a virtual machine in Azure for you. And we add a bunch of scripts to the project or to the solution, so you can also even automate that whole provisioning and deployment process. So right down here in the output window, you can see that our Visual Studio instance has started creating that virtual machine in Azure, and we get a constant status so that we know where we're at. Now that the virtual machine has been provisioned, we can see in our solution that Visual Studio added a bunch of scripts. For example, here it's the Publish Web Application VM script. It gives you a good idea how to use PowerShell in order to provision a virtual machine and then also to add the web deploy package to it. But let's assume I just want to publish to that virtual machine because I've written some code and I just want to publish into it. I go to Web Application and select Publish. And once the Publish dialog comes up, you can see that everything is already wired up. And that's the really great part of the Visual Studio dev test feature for creating those virtual machines. Because as I mentioned at the very beginning, we provision your target environment. In that case, the virtual machine. We add a bunch of scripts to the project. But we also wire everything up that as you as a developer, you can just go ahead and publish your application. So let's look at another way. of provisioning virtual machines in Visual Studio. So on the left-hand side, I have the Server Explorer, and the Server Explorer in here lists all the virtual machines I have. So in here, I could also go ahead and create just a virtual machine, which would basically follow the same flow as we've seen before. I'm going to select a subscription, and then I'm going to select what kind of server images I want. And in this case, take this one, and I'm going to name it this one, Visual Demo. I already had this. I'm going to add a username and a password to it. And then next, can select the cloud services I want for this one. So I'm getting a selection of all the cloud services that are available. And I can select the storage account here, hit next. Here I can add a bunch of endpoints to my machine if I wanted to, and then I hit create. So this follows exactly the same thing. Visual Studio goes out, uses a bunch of calls to create the virtual machine for you. So once the virtual machine has been created, let's go to the one that we have created recently. Go to our virtual machine here. So as part of the dev test lifecycle, let's say you have some orchestration master like a Puppet master, Chef repository, or even a DSC server. And you want to get all the configuration down to your virtual machine. You can do that now from Server Explorer. Just go to the Configure tab. And here you get an idea about the virtual machine. And you see all those endpoints. Remember, we added web deploy to it, so you can see the web deploy endpoint. And in here, you see all the installed extensions. As you remember, I installed a web deploy extension, so it shows up here. But let's assume I want to add another extension to my virtual machine. I can do that easily here. Check one, add it, and then I can enter the configuration for it. Hit OK, and update my virtual machine. So what's happening now is actually we're going to go out, we apply the extension, and the extension is being applied to the virtual machine. It pulls down the configuration from a orchestration or a configuration repository and configures the machine. So I hope you've seen how powerful Visual Studio is when it comes to managing dev test environments or creating dev test environments in Azure. Just to recap here, once you create a new web project, you can select you want to host that web project in a virtual machine and apply the extensions to it. Or once you have a virtual machine already created and you want to apply certain extensions to it, or do other things like you want to capture the image in order to get a snapshot of it, you can do that from Visual Studio Server Explorer. All right. Let's switch gears a little bit and look at the new preview portal, because it also introduces the concept of resource groups, as I mentioned before. So in here, you can hit the plus sign. And what I just want to show you is what's possible. While Windows Server 2012 R2 Data Center is a single machine, in here we also provide you with the capability to provision entire SharePoint farms. So the underlying concept is really the resource group, which describes your environment. And here in the beta portal, we've already offered you a pre-baked SharePoint farm resource group template that you can use to create a new SharePoint farm. Also, if we drill deeper into it or further down here, you see if you want to create just a website plus SQL Server, which in that case is an Azure website plus a SQL Server, you can just use that option and provision that environment for you. So what that actually should show you is how powerful Azure has become when it comes to creating dev test environments. Not only that you have multiple ways of creating single machines or single instance virtual machine through Visual Studio or PowerShell or the portal. No, we're even taking one step further and allow you to create entire environments now through the portal. So the last thing I really want to show you guys is what is so great about our MSDN offering. So for that, let's switch back to our portal, and I'm going to sign in with an account that has my MSDN subscription enabled. So this is now a different account, and this account is linked to an MSDN subscription. And what I want to show you now is the images that we created specifically for our MSDN subscribers, which add a great benefit to it. So in that subscription, I can go File New or New Virtual Machine from Gallery. And in the Gallery option, I have an MSDN category. If I click the MSDN category, I see all the images that are available to me as an MSDN subscriber. Now that I'm having an MSDN Ultimate subscription, so I can use every single image in there. If I had if I had an MSDN Premium subscription, I would be limited to just the premium machines. But let's look at the Visual Studio ones and the client ones. So here we have specific Windows client images, which are great for test purposes, because sometimes you want to just test applications and run on clients, but you don't want to set up a laptop or a desktop for doing so. So in that case, you can just go ahead and provision a virtual machine of the Windows 8.1 or Windows 7 Enterprise image. Also, we just recently added the Windows 10 technical preview image for you. So if you want to play around with Windows 10 and you want to test how your applications are still working on Windows 10, you can use that option to create a virtual machine. Then we have a bunch of virtual machines that have tools installed, as I mentioned before. In that particular case, we have Apache tools, Cordova tools on it. And then we have the simple Visual Studio images. In that case here, it's Visual Studio Premium 2013 on Windows Server 2012. And those are really images that we consider as a dev desktop, because not only is there Visual Studio on it, but it also has SharePoint on it and SQL Server. So if you want to provision one of those images, you get a whole development environment rather than just a virtual machine with Visual Studio on it. So I can just go ahead and provision a new one. And I can choose a new username and my password here. Hit next. I can just go through the create new virtual machine wizard in the portal. Hit next. Here I could actually install some extensions as we've seen in Visual Studio. And then I hit OK. And it goes ahead and provisions the image for me. So while this is provisioning, I've already provisioned one, just to show you what's on that image. Let's connect to this one. So what I'm doing now is I'm using a remote desktop to connect to that image. And I'm going to use name. Okay. So now I'm connecting to that virtual machine. Now that I've signed into that virtual machine, you can see there's something different on it, right? I have a bunch of help links that says SharePoint, configure SharePoint standalone, configure SharePoint plus Active Directory, configure SQL Server, and I have Visual Studio. By the way, the Visual Studio version on those virtual or in those images has always been patched, and it's always been at the latest version. So in that case, it would be update 4. We also have a bunch of scripts on that virtual desktop which allow you to configure SharePoint in standalone or SharePoint in a domain scenario. So with that, we're hoping we provide you with a very compelling offering for SharePoint development or just SQL Server development if you just want to get a development machine ready right away. So those were the demos I had to show today, and I hope you enjoyed the demos and you learned how to use Visual Studio for dev test, or how to use Visual Studio to create dev test environments in Azure. Also how to use the portal to do this. And I hope I gave you like a quick view on what's different for MSDN subscribers, or what offerings do we have for the MSDN subscribers here. All right, to wrap up, let's look at some useful resources for more information on Azure Dev Test. The first link takes you to our official Azure Dev Test portal. So on that portal, you find really all the information you need to get started with Azure Dev Test, or more information if you're already using Azure Dev Test. For example, what kind of tools you can use, what new images are available, and so on and so forth. The second link is more targeting towards like creating and managing VMs in Visual Studio. As I've shown throughout the demo, there are actually two ways of creating virtual machines in Visual Studio, and that page will describe in detail when to use which options and what are the differences. The third link describes how to create a SharePoint server farm using Azure Resource Manager in the new portal. This is a very good concept, so not only for SharePoint developers, but if you want to get a feel how you use Azure Resource Manager to provision a more complex, sophisticated farm of servers, this is also a good starting point to learn more about it. And the last link is really just a link to a blog post about our Windows client images for MSDN subscribers. So the link has some useful information about implications when you can use those Windows client images, in what scenarios you can use them, how you can use them, and so on. So with that, I really hope you enjoyed the session, and I hope you enjoy using Azure for Dev Test.